After becoming a guinea pig for his own teleportation machine, a scientist begins to transform into a human insect hybrid and discovers that his DNA has been fused with that of a fly. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, The Fly, from 1986. At a science convention in the United States, a young woman called Ronnie interviews the eccentric scientist, Seth Brundle. He says that his new invention will be able to change the world, but she doesn't believe him and sets off to interview other scientists. However, Seth insists that his creation is the greatest of all mankind and invites Ronnie to visit his laboratory. Even though she doubts it, she decides to go and the two arrive at the place, which is located in the middle of an abandoned alley. The young woman is suspicious of Seth, even more so when they enter the laboratory and the guy starts playing the piano in the room, just like that. Ronnie is about to leave, but the scientist finally presents his invention, which he has named telepods. He then asks Ronnie to give him something of hers to test the machine on, and the young woman teases him by handing him one of her pantyhose. The scientist then activates the central computer with a voice command, and a strong light is emitted on the telepod, making the pantyhose disappear. Ronnie isn't impressed by this, but Seth shows her that the object ended up in the second telepod. In other words, his creation is nothing less than a teleportation machine, capable of disintegrating and reintegrating an object from one place to another. Faced with this discovery, Ronnie's doubts turn into admiration and curiosity for the scientist. She starts asking questions and records everything on a tape, but when he realizes this, Seth discovers that the young woman is actually a journalist. He asks her to give him the tape, as this experiment cannot yet be revealed to the world. However, Ronnie knows that this will be one of the biggest stories of her career, and she leaves, taking the tape that reveals the invention of teleportation with her. The next day, Ronnie shows the tape to her editor, Stathis, but he doesn't believe the story and thinks the scientist is a fake. To the journalist's surprise, Seth arrives on the scene shortly afterwards and is relieved to learn that the editor didn't take what was on the tape seriously. Although he's upset that the journalist almost revealed everything, he invites her for a snack and makes her an offer she can't refuse. If the invention of the telepods is kept secret, he'll let her follow the whole process and write a book about his incredible invention when it's ready. Ronnie asks what's left for the invention to be completed, and Seth says that it's not yet possible to teleport living beings. When he succeeds, the journalist will be free to publicize the telepods and achieve the fame and prestige she has always dreamed of. After this proposal, Ronnie returns home and thinks more about it, but she is startled to find Stathis waiting for her. The two had dated in the past, but things didn't end well and she tells him to leave, as well as returning the copy of her key. After that, Ronnie decides to accept Seth's proposal and starts recording the tests with the telepods. The first of these is carried out with a baboon, which is transported from one pod to another. However, when they look inside the second pod, they realize that the test has failed, and what they find is the poor animal with its body destroyed. Seth is disappointed with the result and believes that this happened because the central computer doesn't yet know how to materialize the flesh of a living being. He then asks to be left alone and think for a while, but Ronnie tries to comfort him, as she is gradually becoming fond of the scientist. In the middle of the conversation, the two have a romantic moment, and the closeness between them gives Seth an idea of how to solve his experiment. The next day, he does a test with 2 pieces of meat and puts one of them on the telepod. He then roasts both pieces and asks Ronnie to try them. She says that the first piece looks like an ordinary fillet, but the second it feels synthetic and strange. This confirms Seth's suspicions that the central computer was not replicating the flesh of a living being in the teleportation, but creating an artificial skin. With this discovery, Seth applies a new formula to the computer so that it can better understand how a living being is materialized. While the scientist prepares for the next test, Ronnie leaves the lab, unaware that Stathis was watching her from nearby. Minutes later, the young woman goes to buy a new suit and tie for Seth, but her ex-boyfriend shows up at the store and has a jealous fit. Despite the embarrassment of the situation, Ronnie puts Stathis in his place and leaves. Later, she returns to the laboratory and records a new test on the telepod, with yet another baboon. Just as before, the animal is disintegrated in one of the pods, but this time, from the second pod, the same baboon emerges, fully materialized and healthy. The couple celebrate this huge success, and Ronnie suggests that they take a vacation together. Seth is very happy with the idea and decides to make a romantic dinner for the two of them right there. While he's ordering Chinese food, Ronnie finds an envelope from Stathis. Inside is a photo of the cover of the next magazine, with Seth's face on it and the revelation that the scientist has created the first teleportation machine. Fearing that the whole project will be revealed prematurely, Ronnie decides to leave to resolve the situation. Seth is confused that she suddenly wants to leave, but she keeps it a secret so he doesn't worry and just says that she needs to wrap things up with her ex-boyfriend. Shortly afterwards, she goes to Stathis' office and confronts him about the envelope he left behind. The guy says he's going to divulge the truth about the scientist in the next magazine, just to provoke his ex-girlfriend and her current partner. To protect Seth, she lies to Stathis, saying that there is nothing between them and that she is just following the process of creating the machine. Stathis believes her, but warns her that he wants to know all the details of this project. Meanwhile, in the lab, Seth is worried that Ronnie has left, as she still has feelings for her ex-boyfriend. However, his attention turns to the baboon, who is trying to swat a fly away from his face. Seth realizes that the animal is healthy after undergoing the experiment and, amidst the confusion in his mind, decides to test the machine himself. The scientist then enters the telepod, but doesn't realize that the same fly that was bothering the baboon has entered with him. The telepod door is closed and the computer activates the machine, which disintegrates Seth completely. Shortly afterwards, the second pod opens and out of it emerges Seth, completely materialized. Apparently, the test was successful and the scientist appeared in his natural form, without suspecting that another being had also taken part in the experiment. Hours later, Ronnie returns to the lab and discovers that Seth did the experiment on his own with the telepods. She scolds him for risking his life, but he justifies himself, saying that he was angry that Ronnie had left to see her ex-boyfriend. However, she explains that there is nothing between them anymore and the couple reconciles. Later, at night, they are both asleep and a fly flies into the room, making a noise. In a mysterious way, Seth not only senses the insect's presence, but manages to catch it easily with his hands. The scientist realizes that there is something different about himself and decides to run some more tests. Shortly afterwards, Ronnie wakes up to find Seth in the laboratory, performing exercises and acrobatics with extreme ease. The two are impressed and, at the same time, frightened by this, but they deduce that it was a side effect of the teleportation. Days pass and the couple take a stroll through the city, where Seth takes the opportunity to present Ronnie with a necklace. Afterwards, the two of them go for coffee at a diner and Seth starts talking non-stop about how his body is different. He believes that telepods can not only teleport people, but also purify them. He deduces that by being disintegrated and materialized, all the impurities in his organism were eliminated and therefore his abilities were improved. While he talks non-stop, Ronnie notices that Seth is more agitated, impatient and has a voracious craving for sugar. Despite the awkwardness, the two return to the laboratory, where they share a romantic moment. In the heat of the moment, Ronnie feels something strange on Seth's back. When she looks more closely, she finds hairs coming out of a wound on his back and takes a pair of scissors to cut them, but the hairs are very tough. She finishes cutting everyone up and, at that moment, Seth has an absurd idea. He decides that Ronnie also needs to go through the telepod. That way, she will become a purified human being, just like him, and will be free of all weaknesses, such as tiredness and sleep. The young woman refuses, but Seth doesn't mind and pulls her by the arm towards the telepod. Finally, Ronnie puts a stop to it and says that something has gone wrong in the experiment, because Seth is becoming someone very different from who he was before. However, the scientist is revolted by these words and calls Ronnie a coward for not wanting to share a better life with him. So he changes his clothes and leaves, determined to find someone who wants to carry out the experiment alongside him. Hours pass and Seth wanders the streets, consuming more and more sugar and with his face covered in strange spots. After a while, he arrives at a bar, where a beautiful young woman is watching two guys in an arm wrestling match. Seth tries to win over the young woman, which makes the two guys uncomfortable and they go to the scientist to make amends. However, Seth is undeterred and bets them $100 that he can beat either of them in a contest of strength. One of the guys accepts the bet and they go to the table for an arm wrestling match. Everyone in the bar believes that Seth will lose humiliatingly, but when the contest begins, the scientist demonstrates superhuman strength. His opponent persists, but to his misfortune, Seth not only wins the arm wrestling match, but causes a fracture in the guy. Everyone is horrified by this result, but Seth doesn't care and leaves, along with the beautiful young woman. The two spend the night going from bar to bar, until they finally arrive at the laboratory. However, the young woman is exhausted from drinking, but Seth takes her in his arms and walks up the stairs effortlessly. Shortly afterwards, the scientist decides to impress her with his invention and uses the teleportation machine again. Once again, he appears materialized in the second telepod, but unbeknownst to him, the hairy wound on his back is getting worse. The two then enjoy the rest of the evening, until Seth insists that the young woman go through the telepods. She refuses and the scientist tries to take her by force, but Ronnie appears before them. Seth tries to cover it up and sends the bar girl away. Although hurt by what she saw, Ronnie says she's worried about the scientist, because she took the hairs she cut from his back to a laboratory and the analysis showed that they are not human, but from an insect. Because of this, she insists that Seth is ill and needs treatment, but he calls her jealous and throws her out. Afterwards, the scientist goes to the bathroom to prove that he's better than ever, but he discovers in the mirror that his face is deforming to make matters worse. His fingernails are falling off, and when he presses his fingers together, a strange white liquid comes out of them. Seth fears that his experiment will gradually end his life and goes to the central computer to investigate what might have gone wrong. After doing a scan on the day of the experiment, Seth discovers that a fly was present in the telepod. If that wasn't bad enough, the computer reveals that when the scientist's body was reconstructed, its composition merged with that of the insect on a molecular level. Eventually, the doctor discovers that, because of this oversight in the experiment, he will be transformed into a creature that is a hybrid of human and fly. Days go by and Ronnie tries to get on with her life, working on other stories for the magazine. Suddenly, the phone rings and on the other end of the line is Seth, who begs her to come and visit him because his condition is getting worse and worse. Ronnie immediately goes there and finally finds Seth, but she is horrified by his appearance. The scientist appears with a completely deformed face and a weakened body, forcing him to use canes to keep himself upright. He explains everything that has happened and fears that, with his gene mixed with that of an insect, his body will soon deteriorate completely. What's more, Seth can no longer chew his food and instead produces an acidic substance to dissolve it so that he can eat. By accident, he does it in front of Ronnie and is embarrassed, feeling like a freak in front of her. Seth tries to cover it up, but as he tries to walk away, his ear falls on the floor, which only makes him feel worse. Despite this tragic situation, Ronnie takes pity on her former love and hugs him, while Seth begs her to help him. Hours later, Ronnie looks for the only person she knows to help her, Stathis. At first, he refuses, but when he sees Ronnie's sadness, he decides to help her and asks her to record a video showing Seth's current condition. The journalist agrees and goes to the lab to check on him, but can't find him. Suddenly, she hears the voice of Seth, who appears hanging from the ceiling. He seems to be stronger than the day before and believes that his fly skills are evolving more and more. Ronnie is frightened, but Seth believes he has found a purpose for this transformation, to become a completely new being. He even calls himself Brundlefly, the first human-insect hybrid. Worst of all, Seth seems to like his new version and asks Ronnie to record everything on camera. Not knowing what else to do, the journalist agrees and starts recording the scientist, who decides to show how he digests food. Just like a fly, it is unable to digest solid food and needs to turn it into something liquid. So, just as it did last time, it puts the acid enzyme out into the food and swallows it straight away. Afterwards, Ronnie takes the recording to Stathis, who watches it all in her apartment, with an expression of horror and disgust for the fly man. Soon afterwards, Ronnie returns home crying and says she's found out she's pregnant with Seth's child. She fears that her son was born after the experiment and that he too will become a hybrid creature. Despite this fear, the day comes for Ronnie to give birth to Seth's son and Stathis accompanies her to the operating room. The doctors begin the procedure, but realize that something is wrong. They ask Ronnie to push as hard as she can to expel the baby, but to the horror of everyone there, what comes out is a gigantic fly larva. Fortunately, it was all just a terrible nightmare for Ronnie, who wakes up in fear of what is being generated in her womb. Meanwhile, in the laboratory, Seth loses more and more of his humanity as he transforms into a giant fly. To stop this process, he looks for a solution in the computer, which tells him there is only one option: to use the telepod to merge with pure human beings. He decides to do this and sends a voice command for the computer to record everything, but his voice is no longer recognized. Seth then switches to the manual command and puts the pencil he was holding in his mouth. In doing so, all the teeth in his mouth fall out onto the computer. Disgruntled, Seth picks them up and puts them in the bathroom cupboard, where there are other parts of his body that have fallen out because of the transformation. Shortly afterwards, Ronnie shows up at the lab and tries to tell Seth that he's going to be a father, but when she sees him in a state of complete degeneration, she can't do it. The scientist then asks her to leave and never come back, because he has become a monster who can hurt her, even without meaning to. In addition, Seth says that he has come to the conclusion that he has always been as insignificant as an insect and that he has tried to be more human, but that dream is over. These words make Ronnie even more distressed and she runs back to the car, where Stathis is waiting for her. She begs him to help her eliminate what is inside her body, as she fears that something terrible could be born. The two of them go to a clinic to carry out the procedure, without realizing that the fly man was hiding on the roof and heard everything. When they arrive at the clinic, the doctor asks Ronnie to reconsider, but she says she's determined to go ahead with it. Faced with this decision, the doctor asks her to wait in the operating room, only for Seth to sneak through the window and take Ronnie away. The two end up on a rooftop and the scientist asks her to keep the baby alive, but Ronnie refuses. While they talk, Stathis, who saw the fly man capture Ronnie, goes to the lab, armed with a shotgun and willing to save his ex-girlfriend. However, they haven't arrived yet and Stathis goes to analyze the central computer. On the screen, it is shown that Seth is developing a new experiment, in which he has created a third pod to merge himself with another individual, in order to create a single being. Confused, Stathis doesn't notice when the fly man comes down from the roof and jumps on him. Stathis tries to fire the shotgun at the scientist's head, but he grabs his arm and then pours his acid enzyme, completely corroding Stathis' hand. The guy screams in pain and drops the shotgun to the ground, but when he tries to pick it back up, Seth pours the enzyme into Stathis' foot, which is gradually corroded. Finally, the fly man prepares to deliver the final blow, but Ronnie appears on the roof and asks him not to do it. Seth obeys and climbs the wall until he reaches her on the roof. He then asks her to help him, as he believes he has finally found a way to become human again. Ronnie accepts and asks how he's going to do it, and Seth reveals his insane plan. With the help of the telepod, he intends to merge with Ronnie and the child in her womb, so that they become a single being, more evolved than an ordinary human. With his evil plan revealed, Seth pulls Ronnie towards the pod, but she resists and pushes his face. As she does so, the worst happens and Seth's jaw detaches from his face, along with other parts of his body, which begin to fall to the ground. Finally, everything that was human about Seth collapses, leaving only a gigantic, monstrous fly. The creature wants nothing more than to complete its macabre experiment and throws Ronnie into one of the pods to enter the other. Shortly afterwards, the central computer starts the countdown to the merger between Ronnie, her son and the giant fly. There are only a few seconds left before the machine is activated, but as luck would have it, Stathis gets up and, shotgun in hand, fires at the power cables in the pod where Ronnie is. Thanks to this, the pod is deactivated, which makes the giant fly furious and it tries to get out of the equipment to finish off Stathis once and for all. However, the counter reaches 0 and the teleportation is activated, taking the giant fly with it. Freed from danger, Stathis crawls over to Ronnie and frees her. However, in the third pod, the fly materializes, but it is too weak and its body is increasingly destroyed. Even so, it heads towards Ronnie who, with no other choice, picks up the shotgun on the ground to defend herself. The fly continues towards her, but instead of attacking her, it grabs the barrel of the shotgun and points it at its own head. Ronnie understands that Seth is begging her to put him out of his misery, but the young woman refuses. However, as a last act of mercy, she shoots the fly, eliminating it once and for all. Despite all the horror she has been through, Ronnie kneels before Seth's body and weeps for her beloved who, in his attempt to fulfill his dream of changing the world, turned his own life into a terrible nightmare. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.